Today we've got a great malicious compliance story all about the fact that you don't know somebody. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, don't use price labels. I want it deducted from my bonus. I used to work for a small, locally owned supermarket chain with a small level of bureaucracy and a high focus of getting stuff sold. After a few years, we were taken over by a national chain, which introduced much bureaucracy where the emails and phone calls from the bottom to the top would be lost to the ether and left unanswered. Their focus was highly on image, with staff at head office who seemingly worked to ensure similar-sized products sat next to each other on each shelf so that it looked nice. They also changed the shop manager's incentives. Their bonuses were the operating budget of their store, minus wages, expenses, and written-off stock. So obviously we were now operating on a shoestring budget, so the manager got as much money as they could. Before the takeover, we had an award-winning butcher department that worked with local farms and catered to customer requests. The new firm immediately closed the counter and filled chillers full of pre-packed sliced meats instead, that we frequently discounted to prevent them going to the bin. One time we received a dozen cases of a high-end cut of meat, way more than we would usually stock of an affordable packet, and therefore at risk of running past its sell-by date and being thrown out. As it was a new product, we didn't have a price label for it. After waiting a weekend for the system to update, I emailed head office for a label and filled the chiller using a pricing gun left over from the takeover to label up each individual packet. We sold a few by the time I came back in the following week, but was pulled aside by the minglement. The area manager had been in to inspect the shop and was horrified at the ugly labels and demanded they be taken off the shelves until the label was ready. I explained the issue, but they wouldn't have it, so I took them down as instructed and left it in the big fridge at the back of the store. They sat there for a month until they expired, after which someone else recorded them for disposal. A few days later, someone at the head office noticed the enormous increase in wastage and reported it. Down the chain it came. Red-faced area manager storms in to shout at stern-faced store manager, who in turn calls over the tannoy for me to drop everything and get to his office. "I'm just waiting for the label," I told them both, as they searched for a scapegoat for the 3,000 British pound write-off. I've since had similar other employers where department heads had bonuses tied to sales, but didn't like me pricing up produce, so hardware would sit and gather dust. I'm paid by the hour, no bonus, so I'm not going to argue the case. Hey, this person was just trying to make you some money, get you some sales, when you're not prepared with your equipment. If you're gonna give them a hard time about it, well, don't be surprised when they're gonna go, "Alright, it's not worth my time." Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you enjoy awesome stories of malicious compliance, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons down below? That said, our next story is, check the property line? Okay. Back when I was responsible for garden and grounds related issues for a housing developer, Susan popped her head over her neighboring property's fence. Susan was abrupt and rude, but not quite Karen level, so Susan it is. "Are you going to cut back all of these weeds growing over to my side of the fence?" "Yes, I have to reclaim this public footpath, and those same weeds are on council, local authority, land, but will also be causing me problems if I don't deal with it. I'm actually here to do that now." They say, "Because it's your company land, and I expect it to be cut all the way around." Motions to all three sides of her white long garden fence. "Look, it's growing over into my garden and it's not been dealt with since your company bought the land." I say, "That's actually why I've been hired full-time. I'm not part of the development crew. I'm here to maintain areas and deal with issues like this. Today I can clear the ivy from your fence, but that triangle of wilderness between yours, ours, and the council will have to be next week sometime." They say, "You'll be cutting down on the other side?" Motions to where I can't see due to the triangle of wilderness. I say, "Actually, no, that side is between you and the council. The school on the other side doesn't open for another year, so I suggest not waiting until then to contact them." They say, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" I say, "I'm happy to pull down the ivy for you this once and poison along the fence line. It'll do you for now. The company I work for is trying to improve relations. And as I've stated, I'll take care of this one side indefinitely." They say, "I need you to prove you aren't responsible for that side too." The next day, I consult my drawing, map, of the grounds and property line. Turns out I was wrongly informed. my manager expressly forbids me from tackling anything remotely near her fence line. She says, "Are you back to cut down this area?" I said, "I'm glad you're here." Shows drawing. This is the area in question, and it's all council property. The yellow line is where my responsibility ends. Susan never had anyone cut down the vegetation. Ivy, bramble, and nettles absolutely ate her fences over the next 3 years, and last time I checked, they were replaced a meter inside the property line. Demi Karen pushes her luck and ends up losing free maintenance along her fence line. She did once ask me to put lots of poison on the offending weeds, but all I could offer her was a normal spray that my company provides if she called. I said they might offer it for the same nominal price I would do a driveway for, but she never called. Sounds to me like this was a pretty lazy Susan. I guess I can't blame her for shooting her shot and seeing if she can get some free yard work, you know? Yard work is definitely not my favorite on the list of things to do. Our next story is, so you want to be informed after every customer transaction? Bet. I'm pretty sure that if I asked for a show of hands of how many of y'all had that one manager or boss that was the worst at micromanaging, roughly 80 to 85% of you guys would raise your hand. Anywho, a few years back, I used to work retail at a brick and mortar shop owned by a guy that, well, let's just say that if we left him alone, the place would fall apart within minutes. There was myself, 2 other associates, and 2 assistant managers, one of whom bought the business out, turned it into an online shop, and is doing pretty well for himself, but I digress. Said owner had no clue how our inventory system worked, let alone our point of sale system. Day-easy, nightmare I know, but absolutely insisted that he knew everything about the place inside and out, and threatened you with unemployment whenever things didn't go his way. One day I called his bluff and walked. Not 30 minutes later, while I was sitting in a nearby park, did he call me, begging for me to come back. Squeezed a sizable raise out of him in the process. Now, all of that to this, the meat of this little bit of malicious compliance. Said know-it-all owner was so convinced of his hype that he insisted and demanded that we call him after every customer transaction, go over what was said so he could tell us we were wrong, even after upselling and setting up a delivery account. Mind you, this is in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where it's busy for roughly 5 out of the 8 hours during any given shift. Cue the malicious compliance. Despite a line of customers at my register, I had to stop things, pick up the phone, and make the call. All while my line of customers in what would be typical New York levels of patience would drop their stuff and walk out. The ones that stuck around waited the 5, maybe 10 minutes each phone call. It got so bad at one point, one of my regulars, whom everyone knows to at least the 2nd degree, points if you could guess who, grabbed the receiver and proceeded to lay into know-it-all owner about how he's losing business because of his asinine policy. Owner dug in his heels though, bless his heart, and insisted that things be done his way. Alright, bet. I tried to keep the convos receiver only. Now it's been upgraded to speakerphone. Now everyone in the store, and I do mean everyone, can hear how much of a colossal jerk he was. Business that was once $5,000 a day in store sales dropped to just north of $1.5 thousand, while deliveries, while at about $6,000 a day, dropped to roughly half that. With online reviews being the most hilarious I've read since I started working retail and customer service decades ago, know-it-all owner was forced to give up on his policy, eventually announcing his retirement a few months later and selling to the assistant manager I mentioned earlier. It's something we still joke about years later in our occasional catching up sessions. I would say, hey, remember that time know-it-all demanded us that we call him after every transaction? The assistant manager said, yeah. I laughed in his face about it. He didn't like me much after. Now, I've read a lot of micromanaging stories, but this might be just about one of the worst micromanager offenders I've ever heard. They wanted you to call them after every customer transaction? I mean, that's just insane. Our next story is, sure, you can have a cocktail. I work as a bartender at a popular downtown restaurant, and one evening, we were hosting a large party for a group of entitled customers who were demanding, rude, and overall unpleasant to deal with. They seemed to think that they were above the rules and wanted everything done their way, regardless of how unreasonable it was. One of the customers, a particularly arrogant man, requested a special drink that wasn't on our menu. I kindly informed him that we didn't have the ingredients to make it, but he insisted that I go out and buy them just for him. I explained to him that it wasn't possible, as the liquor stores were closed by that time, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. That's when I decided to use malicious compliance to my advantage. I told him I would do my best to fulfill his request, but it would take some time. I then left the bar and went outside for a few minutes, letting him stew in his own frustration. When I returned, I presented him with a drink that was made with the cheapest, lowest quality ingredients that we had available. The look on his face was priceless as he took a sip and realized that it was not the high-end drink that he had requested. But the best part was when he demanded to see the manager who would witness the entire exchange. She simply looked at him and said, "Well, she did exactly what you asked for." They were so petty and childish, and it was completely deserved. I'm pretty sure everybody would be happy if they just walked right out and never came back. This is one of those people that get all upset and say, "I'm never giving you my business again." And the workers are all rejoicing because they know they'll never come back. Our next story is, client said she wanted her website to show the best interior design service. Love this sub, so I thought I'd post a story from about 12 years ago. At university, I designed websites to make some extra cash and pay for tuition, rent, etc. I got pretty good at it and had a great network of clients around London, UK. One day, I was introduced to a lady, we'll call her Debbie, who ran an interior design agency in West London. I put the speech marks there because all her clients were her friends or friends of her husband. She was extremely wealthy, lived in a house on Warwick Ave in Maida Vale, and had a chauffeur on call. All of her money derived from her husband, who seemed very sketchy. She also had these 2 sons who just sat around the house all day smoking weed despite being in their late 20s. Anyway, I designed a website for her, which she was very pleased with. Her exact brief was, "I want this website to show the best interior design service in London." I quoted the price, she agreed, and I built it. But then when it came time to pay, she suddenly started complaining that the website wasn't quite right. Despite being live and generating lots more traffic than before, she refused to pay and stopped answering my calls. What she didn't realize was that I owned the domain name and could legally do whatever I wanted with it. So I redirected it to her closest competitor, a nearby interior design agency run by a rival of hers she hated. Within 6 hours, I got a phone call from her going ballistic that our website was broken and that it had to be fixed ASAP. I explained that I couldn't really do anything, but vaguely suggested that if she stumped up some cash, then maybe I could do something. I won't repeat the names she called me, but the next morning, my account was credited with the money. I was never bothered to change the domain back and blocked her number after that. The site is still live to this day. Ladies and gentlemen, if you hire somebody to work on a website for you, whether it's front-end, back-end, or both, pay your web developers, please. I fully support anybody that takes over this website and holds it hostage when they don't get paid for their work. Our next story is, I don't know that person. Not quite sure if this is malicious enough for here, but it used to make me chuckle when it happened. A few years ago, I worked outbound debt collection for a phone company. It's one of the few jobs I would never do again, as making the same call a few hundred times a shift was soul-destroying, but hey, it paid the bills when I was between things I actually wanted to do. Early on in the call, I had to establish who I was talking to and ask some simple security questions before I went into why I was calling and tried to extract at least some of their overdue bill from them. Something that happened at least once a week, if not more often, was someone would answer and tell me they had no idea who I was calling about, i.e. they didn't know the person named on the contract. The process that we had to comply with, if they were adamant they didn't know the person on the contract, was to mark their line as potentially stolen and block all calls, text, and data, so that the only number they went through to was customer services, where they had to go through a much more rigorous identification process, and then probably pay off their debt to have their line unblocked. If they failed that, they had to go into store, which several did, with photo ID to get it sorted. The best part for us was that anything they paid within a certain time of talking to us went towards our targets, so invariably we got a chunk of value counted as they wanted their phone to work again. Honestly, I'm just surprised they even had a success rate at getting people to answer these security questions. If somebody calls me up and says, "Hello, this is about so-and-so, but first we need to answer some simple security questions," I'd be extremely weary, especially if it's not anything I provoked that I know of. Like, I wonder how many people just kinda hung up. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely awesome malicious compliance story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.